We'll go on to another question. This is from Chris O'Connor, please. Chris O'Connor.
Is it the Prime Minister or the Governor of the Bank of England who's running the economy?
Eric Pickles.
This is a big watershed moment. It is clearly the Governor of the Bank of England. What the Governor essentially did, he gives this kind of advice out on a very regular basis, but this is the first time ever this has happened. This is the first time ever it's been made public, and we've had a disagreement with the Prime Minister, the other side of the world. We've seen his ministers criticising him, talking about you can't make an announcement on the plane and expect the thing to be operating by the time you get back. But this is more than just telling the Emperor he hasn't got any clothes. This has effectively ruled out an entire strategy that the Prime Minister wanted to pursue, which was a fiscal stimulus. Now, there's nothing wrong with a fiscal stimulus if you've got the money. But this big, gaping hole that in such a short time the Prime Minister has left for you, for your children, and for your children's children in order to pay back means that essentially the Governor of the Bank of England have sort of walked up to him, held him by the elbow and said, yes, of course you are still the Prime Minister. Now let's sit down quietly in the corner and have a relook at your medication, because it's over for Mr Brown now. A Prime Minister's authority is just disappearing chunk by chunk.
And by fiscal stimulus, you mean the government spending more without taxing to make up for the extra spending? In other words, increasing their spending?
Well, that's right.
Yeah. Let's have a question from Anne-Marie Brophy, please.
If MPs were paid more, would they stop abusing the spirit of their expenses code?
Yes, their expenses code. McNulty has been in the firing line this week. Michael Winner, do you think if they were paid more, they would stop abusing the spirit of their expenses code, if indeed that's what they're doing?
Well, you know, we look at this nonsense of MPs claiming £80,000 for a house 2 doors from the House of Commons because for reasons that none of us understand. Why are these people getting all this money? There is an ethos of cheating and twisting the rules and taking advantage of things that should not be there in the House of Commons. It is an absolute disgrace. And now they say we want to raise, because it may well be that they'll stop from putting their hand in the till. Well, we can't steal, we'll have it in income. It's absolutely scandalous. We have 3 MPs on this panel. Have any of them ever stood up in the House of Commons or anywhere else and said we are party to, if not indulging in it, in practices which are palpably dishonourable and dishonest? No, I doubt if they have. I think it's a scandal.
Charles Clarke.
Well, it won't be popular to say it, David, but I utterly disagree with Michael. There is not an ethos of cheating, dishonesty and dishonour in the House of Commons. There is not.
Oh, please.
There is not. There are individuals who've done bad things, and there is a process by which they are then brought to book in an appropriate way. The answer to the question that Anne-Marie asked is this. What we should have is an independent process which recommends on salaries and expenses to deal with the issues, and that should simply be voted through. The reason why we're in the mess that we are is the various independent reports that have been made, for example, on pay and on expenses and pensions and additional costs and these kinds of things, have been voted against by the House of Commons, either at the behest of the government because of pay policy at the issue at the time, or at the behest of groups of MPs who've sought to get an advantage out of the situation, which is why Anne-Marie's question has some validity in it. What we should simply do, and I think the Prime Minister's right to have asked for this inquiry, is to go down the situation where we get a clear statement of what's the appropriate salary for a Member of Parliament compared to other walks of life and so on, and what are the appropriate expenses, because we live in a constituency-based system and need staff to support offices and need to travel to and from the constituency and so on, and then vote that through, agree it and enforce it. It's because that hasn't happened that the various terrible things that have gone on and so damaging to politics in the round have happened. And do you include Tony McNulty and Jackie Smith in the terrible things that have happened that have been so damaging to politics? Those are the matters precisely which are being judged now by the Parliamentary Commission, and that's the right way to do it. I don't know the facts facts of those cases. I know they look terrible, but I don't know the facts of the cases, and that's why the inquiry's got to take place, as is happening in both cases, and the conclusions will then be reported. And that is the right way to deal with it.
OK, they look terrible. Ed Davey.
I'm entitled, as an Outer London MP, to claim a London housing allowance for a second London home. I don't claim it. And no Outer London Liberal Democrat MP claims it, and there are some Labour and some Conservative Outer London MPs who could claim it and don't claim it.
And why don't you claim it as a matter of interest?
Because I think it would be unethical to do so. Let me explain why. In 2001, the hours of the House of Commons changed. And instead of sitting through the night and sitting to the early hours as we used to do, when you needed that sort of allowance, we only sit till 10 o'clock 2 nights a week, and the rest of on Wednesday we finish at 7, and on Thursdays at 6. You don't need a second home in London if you live in outer London.
Do you live in Kingston?
I live in Kingston, and I could not look my constituents in the face and say, I need a second home, and I need you to pay for it. It would not be fair. And so I think MPs like Tony McNulty and other outer London MPs, yes, they may have been claiming this allowance within the rules, but I don't think they should have been claiming that allowance. I think the rules should be changed, and unless we make these changes, politics is going to be a very dirty word. And let's remember, there was an internal House of Commons committee that recommended a change to the London housing allowance last year. I voted for it, all my colleagues voted for it, but Labour MPs, including Tony McNulty, voted against that change. And I wonder why.
Well, now he's saying he wants a change.
Well, it's a bit late. He's been claiming all this money for the last few years.
Yeah.
He shouldn't have been claiming that, in my view, and he should have backed the change to the rules that the House of Commons recommended.
The woman there in the middle.
A man was recently jailed for security fraud and made to pay back the money. Rather than the MPs getting an increase on their salaries, surely if they were subject to those measures in the same way, then that kind of fraud would stop.
But it's what happened, David. In the case of Caroline Spellman, where there was an investigation and went through, she was asked to pay money back, and she did pay money back on exactly that basis. I mean, Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she honoured the decision of the House and carried it through precisely in the way that the lady had suggested.
If I could just make one slight, she said right from the very beginning that she would pay that money back.
Eric Pickles, do you have a two-house system with an allowance?
I do indeed have a two-house system and an allowance. But if I could just make a brief contribution...
How far are you away from Westminster?
37 miles.
And you need two houses.
And if I could just make this brief contribution to Hang an MP Week, if I could just...
No, but take your time, take your time.
OK. Then let me explain why. And I have actually had experience of commuting that distance when my wife was ill. She's fully recovered now, but for a month I did it. And it was an extremely difficult experience. I'll explain why. Because the House of Commons works on clockwork. You have to be there. If you're on a committee, you have to be there precisely. Particularly someone like me. I was number 2. Let me explain, my chair. Let me explain. Please just let me explain for a moment. I had to be there. I was
like a job, in other words.
It was like a Yes, exactly like a job. If you're the number 2 in the opposition, essentially running the committee. So I need to be there at 9:30 to move those amendments. It's all right it doesn't matter if a Liberal Democrat isn't there, but it matters. If I'm there.
Cheap.
But it matters if I'm there. I have to be there. So when I was doing this, I was leaving home at 5:30 in the morning to guarantee that I was going to be there, and I wasn't getting back until about 12 and 1 in the morning. Now, you can do that once or twice, you can do that for a while, but you've got to understand the House of Commons runs like clockwork.
Eric,
and I have never, ever claimed my full allowance. I have always claimed the amount... I publish them. I've always published them on my website. They've always been there for people to see. I have always been accountable. And I can tell you, I think that the things are going to come out in a week's time. You'll find that I think I've only cleared about 60% of the allowance. It might even be 55% of the allowance. But I'm a serious guy who will put in the hours, and I will work for those hours. But I can tell you this, it is no fun doing 5:30 in the morning right the way through some time work. Now sometimes you can't be sat on a train saying to yourself, am I going to make it, am I not going to make it? And that's why I do it.
The man there with the open neck shirt. Yes, you, sir.
Yeah. Do you think Fred Goodwin should give some of his pension back, Eric?
Yeah, I do.
Right. That's because he's behaved immorally, and perhaps unreasonably. He's played within the rules. Don't you think that's a bit hypocritical?
Okay.